Hi folks, I'm Jess. I'm your friendly neighbourhood NDIS educator. I represent VIMIAC. That fancy acronym stands for Victorian Mental Illness Awareness Council. We're basically the peak body for people with mental illness in Victoria, which means that we represent you, you represent me, we represent all of those with mental illness. Today we are going to be talking about planning. No, not planning your next holiday, unfortunately. Planning for the NDIS. Planning for the NDIS can be a bit nerve-wracking. I was talking to someone yesterday, it's a bit of an abyss. We don't really know much about it and it can sort of be a bit daunting. So let's start by exploring what to expect in a planning meeting. So a planning meeting essentially goes for an hour and a half to 2.5 hours. Ugh. But you can actually get this split into two if that's a bit difficult with your psychosocial disability. So if you find it hard to focus, you can get it shortened into 2 sessions. And it's also something that takes place generally at an NDIS office, a central office. But like I said, there can be ways around that if you need to for your disability. So in a planning meeting, they'll also ask you all sorts of questions. So they'll ask you things like how you're going, what sort of things you struggle with, what sort of things you're finding difficult, and what your goals are. With your planner, you'll explore all the different supports based on your goals and your needs that might be available to you and that will be reasonable and necessary in this regard. Do we remember what reasonable and necessary means? So basically something that's fair and something that you need for your disability. You don't want to go into your planning meeting unprepared. They're going to ask you a lot of really big picture questions, so it's good for you to start thinking about these questions early. It's important to start with a little bit of homework. So you kind of have to do a bit of study and think about what sort of supports are out there, but especially what are your goals and what do you actually want to get out of the NDIS. There are many different ways to set goals. A common strategy is to come up with a 5-year plan. So if I was to think about what I want in 5 years' time, oh God, how old will I be then? I'll be 29. So when I'm 29, I'd like to maybe be married. I'd like to maybe have a little puppy. I'd like to be working part-time but also studying either my master's or PhD. So it can be big major goals like these, or it can be something more subtle. For example, I'd like to sort of exercise more, I'd like to eat healthier, eat more consistently and sleep better. I'd like to hike more, which is something, it's one of those things that I really like doing, but I probably only do once or twice a year. So it's something I'd like to try. I'd really like to try rock climbing. Rock climbing is a thing that sounds really super cool to me, and I always say I'm going to try it and I don't. So these are things that are worthwhile considering when you're thinking about your NDIS plan. This type of goal setting, so thinking of your short and long-term goals, or 5-year plans or 1-year plans, is really beneficial structure for the NDIS because they will ask you for your shorter and long-term goals and prioritise your supports based on short-term goals initially, then long-term goals. Often it is the case with mental illness that it can be really hard to set goals because we might be thinking, well, there's no point because I'll never accomplish any of these things, or feeling quite helpless. So this is where it can be quite useful to try alternative styles of goal setting. An example might be focusing on your goals from a values perspective. So thinking, what are the things that I value and how can I line up goal-oriented activities with those values? For example, one of the things that I value might be community. Another thing that I value might be art. So you can see if I value these things, you can see a natural connection between maybe a goal for me might be doing something like an art class at a local community centre. There's a reason it's so important to think about what your goals are, and because if you remember from the previous video, when we're looking at reasonable and necessary supports and what sort of supports you can get, your supports need to be goal oriented. So what goals you come up with really shape what supports you can get in your planning session. If you're nervous about the planning process or goal setting in general, a really useful person to contact can be a local area coordinator, LAC or LAC. There's so many acronyms in the NDIS, it's like a whole other language. But they're a really helpful person for you to contact who you can actually work through the process of goal setting and planning as a kind of practice run, and they can help you to feel more confident moving forward with your actual planning session. Whether you're working with a LAC or independently, talking about what sort of supports you might like or what your goals are, it can be a bit overwhelming. You might not know where to start because people might think, well, I want this support, I don't know if it'll get approved, all of those sort of things. So I've come up with a sort of valuable way, I feel, to sort of determine what supports might be suitable for you, and then you can just bring it forward. There's no harm in asking. So, confession time. I used to work in a gym for about 3 years. I was a personal trainer. And yeah, I know, you wouldn't believe that looking at me now, but it's absolutely true. And when we had new clients come into the gym, we would have what was called a motivational interview, which is a certain way of asking them questions about what their goals are and how they're going to achieve them. So in hindsight, this motivational interview I used to do in gyms is very similar to what NDIS planners do in your planning session. So they're talking to you about what your goals are and how you're going to achieve them. So essentially in a gym context, this means my goal might be to gain this much muscle, and I'm going to achieve that by eating this and exercising this way. Whereas with the NDIS, it might be a way of determining, well, my goal is to do this and I need this support to get there. For instance, if we're to talk about that example before of someone who their values are to get out into the community and do art, so they form the goal of going to art class maybe twice a week, they might say that something I need to get there is to have someone take me to art class and escort me there twice a week. And that's just one example of many. So this is a useful tool, I think, thinking, what do I need to get there? What is the barrier between the person I want to be and the person I am now? Figure out what that gap is, and that's a useful way to figure out what support you should ask for. One last note about the planning session. So we've talked a lot about how to prepare for the planning session, but something also to consider is, like I said, it's a 2.5 hour process sometimes, and that can be quite intensive, especially if you are living with a psychosocial disability that affects your ability to concentrate or to be in social situations. So I would just say, and I've said this a million times throughout this video series, self-care is key. Whatever it is, self-care is different for everyone, but whatever it is that you do to look after yourself, make sure you are doing that throughout that process. So that's it from me today. As always, hit up our website if you're not there already, in which case I see you. But Vimiac, VMIAC, we're really shaking up the space of the NDIS, producing all sorts of new content now. So keep up to date with all of us here. I've been Jess. Thanks. Bye.